That's great.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Have you done any podcasts before?
I did one, but it was virtually. So it's like I was excited to be here and like in person and like go through this entire process because it's like
It's new, right?
yeah, and it's once you see people do it a lot, you're like kind of like, well, I'm seeing it from through the lens,
Right.
whereas like being in the moment and having that conversation and like seeing other people's reaction in real time is like, I think, an experience in itself. And to put yourself in these situations, it's like incredibly like experiential because I firmly believe that you have to be able to like talk about your beliefs and be
perspectives.
and just be confident in it. Like, and what?
Just move this a little bit closer to your face here. You can pull on it. It won't break.
Perfect.
Yeah, just like a little bit, right. Pull it right up there.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah. Now we can hear you.
Get in there, yeah. But no, I'm incredibly excited, incredibly happy to be here because it's like the same thing why I started with like academia is to refine my thoughts and how do I process them and how do I articulate it in a way that's not only digestible but also can be retooled and evolve. And it's been quite the process for sure.
Cool, man. That's a great lens to be looking through, really. I mean, the perspective, to have that, awareness is awesome. How to like retool your thoughts and collect them up. And, I've definitely been, working on that myself, just like from a personal standpoint too, like, because we get so much stuff thrown at us all the time that it's just like, sometimes it gets overwhelming and you just really have to kind of learn how to weed through all that and cope. But why don't we just jump right into it? And, thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
Why don't we start right out with, welcome you on here, Brady Paul. And, let's tell the viewers, who is Brady Paul? Like, what's he all about? Where are you from?
Well, I'm originally from Sedensis, which is St. Mary's First Nation in New Brunswick. I'm a member of the Wolastoqey Nation. I'm a Wolastoqey, which means people of the beautiful river. We share the province of New Brunswick with the Mi'kmaq Nation, so there's like a huge misconception where, due to provincial borders, like Mi'kmaq is just Nova Scotia. No, it's like half of New Brunswick, and then PEI and Newfoundland, and so we share that territory with the Mi'kmaq, and we make up what's called the Wabanaki Confederacy, which means people of the dawn, and along with the Penobscot, Abenaki, and Passamaquoddy people, and that stems down into Maine. And so my community, I actually have my nation and some of my communities are in Maine and in Quebec. So by all means, like the borders that, it's kind of challenging when you talk about Indigenous policy, when it's like we are actually across multiple borders.
Right. So you're not provincial per se. Like you can't be like these,
Yeah. And so it's, well, I grew up my whole life in community. From being born, I was taught in community. My entire family and, my life is a big part of my life is always there.
Right.
And that's home. That's where every single one of my community members and my family is from. And growing up in that environment, it definitely was a challenge by all means, but that's everywhere. Like it's, the things that, either experienced or seen, like, to a degree, like, yes, in some dimensions were, unacceptable, and in other dimensions it'd be like it's a normal life. And by all means, I'm grateful for like my mother who throughout all that time was able to keep me on the right path. And so she was an educator, high value in education.
Right.
So she was my kindergarten teacher. She taught in community for 30 years. So she's taught all
within the community.
Yeah. So she was a kindergarten teacher for St. Mary's First Nation, taught
strictly for the Indigenous population there.
Yeah. Served the community and, taught my siblings, all my friends. She's now teaching grandkids of like she's
still doing it.
Yeah. So she's waiting, I believe, until my niece, who's just born recently. So until when she's through, she'll be that's the last one of our family she'll probably teach.
Man, she's a great lady.
Oh, she's a special person before, because she also served in community as a counselor for 20 years as well. Right. And she retired as a counselor. So she didn't lose her election. She was like, no, I'm not running no more. I'm done. I've done my...
She just stepped down kind of type thing.
And just
cool.
And like kind of like Frank Sinatra, I'm like, I'm just going to step away for a moment and like
right.
not get beat out or like you know, it wasn't of a testament to like the work she couldn't do. She was just
sort of well-respected lady in the community.
like someone who, you know, knew what the job is for and served the community on multiple dimensions. And then, you know, watching that but like having that instilled in me, like education's important.
You got to have those people around.
Yeah. And that ultimately led me to, you know, going to high school and like having just that foundation is like, no, she didn't have to get me up. Like I would get myself there. And, you know, being a single mother and until my stepfather stepped in and came into our lives, like, you know, I always thought it's like, what's the less I can do to burden her?
Right.
You know, sometimes I didn't abide by that, you know, and I learned that. And, but now it's like all those things I reflect on and now, are the ways I operate in life. And so really that foundation found me to be successful in academics, had a foundation of how to, you know, why it's important. And also, athletics was a big component of that. And so, you know, playing hockey and stuff like that, but in high school, like
we met at the tower at St. Mary's over 10 years ago now.
Yeah. And
that's
so, that's the thing, right? And like at that time, you know, if I didn't pursue football, if I didn't do well enough to school that to be admitted into post-secondary, like that relationship or that network wouldn't have been open to me. And,
No.
And even if I didn't transfer from Acadia. And so it was really, you know, it was such an opportunity because if I didn't have football, I would have probably went to University of New Brunswick. Probably wouldn't have done as well because I wouldn't have had that, I wouldn't have had that kind of accountability to, you know, go to class, maintain an average.
Right.
That structure, which I carry with me now, like everything's, you know, it's kind of just malicious in its sense where it's like it keeps me, like I don't have to think. I just know what I do every day.
Structured.
I needed it. I thrived in it. And at the time, I should have leaned into it more. But, you know, you're there, you're young, and, you know.
Yeah, you get out other things and attractions. I mean, I wasn't the same guy 10 years ago when we met to today. Is two different people. I mean, not totally, but like you've refined yourself to.
And that's the thing. It's like
improve and you're better.
And I would never want to be the same person who I was.
No, never.
That'd be terrifying. And so, you know, finished up at SMU through education. Was happy and very proud that I graduated.
What'd you graduate with? What'd you pursue?
Bachelor of Arts with a major in history. And it's kind of funny because, you know, everyone's like, why are you taking history? Or like, what are you going to do with that? And I was like, I don't know. Like, but
you just knew that's what you wanted.
Well, I originally went for kin, and then, you know, we've had that kind of, you know, strength-based background.
Yeah,
like
powerlifting. And you did the football and all the strength training.
And I was like, I want to learn more so I can get better at football.
Right.
And I was like, and then once you kind of like look into it, and they're like, I was like, you're not talking about like I was like Louis Simmons, and I was really into that at a younger age, and so it's like, but we're not doing that here. And I was like, why not? And I was like, well, I'm not going to go in to learn something like anatomy. It's like, I know dorsal plantar flexion. I know what I know that. And I was like, well, let me just learn that. And that kind of like allowed me to learn and refine things that I'm interested in, that process of learning. And so why I gravitated to history was, you know, growing up in a First Nation community, I wanted to understand more, like why this is the way it is. It's like, this has never been this whole time. And like, you know, seeing people battle issues, seeing people, you know, losing people, you know, having people who, you know, understand my family much more. I understand my father much more.
Right.
Because they were raised in a different environment, but also subject to so much more.
Right.
And now, like, you know, something about my mother was like, you know, we didn't talk about it, but she was like, she went to Indian day school. And we just started talking about it more and telling more stories. And it's like, yeah, I understand why we're not like a very, like, I'm not a very affectionate person.
Right.
And like, you know, me and my mom and stuff, it's like, all right, yep, see it. Like, quick hug. And we can part ways. And, but like, you know, I knew she'd never loved me less. But it was just, you know, sometimes we're just not a very vocal family. And it's like,
yeah, man, you know what? Like, back at my place too, where I grew up, it wasn't like a super lovey-dovey. Like, you know, like on my wife's side, like they throw it around all the time, and in me it was just not a common, like, probably never said actually. Like, you know, like my grandmother, like on dad's side, just started saying it, but like she's, you know, she's getting old. Like maybe she's starting to think like, you know, I got to start saying this stuff.
Gotta let them
more,
know.
right? You know, because it was like, you know, in relative to our upbringing, it was like, you know, we had pretty high standards, and it was like, it was pretty tough, like to, you know, meet those standards and stuff. So
Well, just to, you know, be the best version of yourself, and, you know, learning, you know, like now I understand. It's like when I left the house, I wasn't a reflection. It wasn't me.
right.
It was a reflection of my mother.
Well, we all are until we can figure ourselves out, right?
And it's just like, and I understand it now. It's like, you know, looking back, it's like, you know, in that environment, you know, social services had a big, you know, eye on our community. It's like, you know, like, oh, I never wanted to go to school and be like that phone call to my mom, like, why is your son looking raggedy? Or,
Right.
it's like, you know, that, and that's real. Like, we deal with that on a daily. It's like, you know, people comment like, is your son malnourished? It's like, what are you talking about? Like,
right. So they're just looking.
Well, it's like in New Brunswick, particularly for a while, like they got their funding based on how many kids they took.
Oh.
And like, you know, that doesn't work. You have to, you know, it's the child did nothing. It's, you know, the parents that need help, and they're not bad parents. And when you kind of had that model, it's like, we're going to take that part of you. And like, again, that's kind of the same approach that they did with like residential schools. You know, they're taking their kids because they're not adequate enough as parents. They're not learning to,
but they're not providing the parents anything to become adequate.
Yeah. And
or
just telling them they're wrong, and like your child will be better. And then you create this rift and dynamic in community. So as I've went through this path of not only dissecting the past, but also dissecting it through my lens of an Indigenous person to want to view it from that perspective. And as, you know, throughout my time, it's like, even reflecting on high school, it's like, you realize that like Canadian history and Indigenous history are the same thing.
Right.
And that
it's all together.
It's actually the foundation. It's like that relationship.
That's where it started, right?
That should be what everyone unites in front of. Like, that should be our guiding principles. Like, we are built, this country was not founded, it was built upon a mutual relationship of respect and humility and coexistence, and not founded. It wasn't, you know, it's the thing. It's like you realize that the word for Canada is derives from the Huron word, which means settlement. And so when you refer to Canadians as settlers, it actually is when you translate it. So when you go to the root word, it's like, you know, Canadians are by definition settlers. And that's why I'm not Canadian. I'm Wolastoqiyik.
Right.
There's a difference.
Because you're not a settler by heritage or ancestry.
But I live it too, right? Like, I speak the language, I practice, I'm on a journey now that's very challenging, but I'm on the process of acquiring more and understanding more traditional aspects and ceremony, and how does that essentially guide me through hard times, because I had some very, like, I would say, non-productive ways of addressing issues.
Sure, I think we've all had those.
Yeah. And now that I'm older, I understand how these are in place to help us and guide us, and this is the way we were intended to live. And I wanted to embody that. And so going, you know, forward, it's having that pride of, you know, knowing where I'm from, who I am, and what what people ultimately died for, to preserve for me, is like incredible. And how do I repay that? And that means of just being proud of who I am. It's not a disability to be Indigenous. It's not a barrier. We're descendants of warriors and very proud, noble people, and that was taken away from us. And now it's like portrayed as something different. It's like, no, that was one of the great gifts I had the opportunity to do when I worked with St. Mary's. It was, you know, help other young Indigenous people, you know, like, no, we're proud people. We're strong. We are resilient by definition. We are the definition of resilience. And, you know, it should never hold, like, I hid it for a long time. Like, I wouldn't speak the language when I was away. When you're encountered with things, I'm like, it was weird, because some people were like, oh, you're like the first Indigenous person I met. I'm like, I know like thousands. Like, we're still alive. You know that, right? Like, it's
right.
And, you know,
so you felt like you had to hide part of yourself from people. That's a shame.
Well, it's not necessarily and to just like go along with some things, and it's like, yeah, because it's like,
Because it's like the
It's draining.
societal norm, I guess.
It still is, but it's so draining to having to like unpack stuff. So it's like,
right.
That was a bit.
Because this isn't who you are, and you're forced to conform, or you feel like you have to,
or be two people. And so it's like
Right.
I would have to like front and project something that wasn't, who I was, and then I would have to like go home to recharge, and then but also then it's in community. I'm like, why are you upset, or like what's bothering you? I'm like, you don't understand it either, because I'm living a life that you don't comprehend. And so I was like in no man's land for a bit.
So you spoke of some like hurdles, like growing up. Are these some of those hurdles like that you're talking about? Like you felt like when you were younger, you had to.
Well, it's just like once I left community, it's like that's not normal, and I want to understand why.
Right.
And now I completely understand it, and I used to have like anger towards my father for the choices he made, and I was like, he doesn't know better, and now I know that why.
Right.
And now it's like I let a part of that was a big piece I carried with me, right? And like had a lot of things like not being able to form, true relationships, always having my guard up, and and that it took some time to address those, and it all came through learning. It all came through diving into this aspect of history that has been hidden, and for right reason, because the more I gather, the more I look at it through, I always have my base in that history and that time. But then when I go and learn about different components of history, so looking at Japanese history, their imperialistic nature and what they've done, looking at World War II, looking at the different atrocities that happened through history, this is on par with that. And like the scary thing is it's still going on. When I found it kind of ironic when Justin Trudeau condemned Russia for annexing territory, but when you realize that, and particularly like in the Atlantic region, based upon our treaty system, settlers annexed our land. It's the same thing, but why do you condemn one? But if you're openly condemning it, you have to then get your house in order before you condemn someone.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of controversial, probably stuff we could get into for what he's done and said, and
but it's going on for years, right? And no one looks at it like that.
Well, it's like, I think people just like to turn a blind eye, and they don't want to, don't want to rock the boat. They want to, hey.
Well, that's the thing. We all have a part in this.
We're just like, adversity, go the other way.
Yeah.
Adversity, go up. No adversity. Like everybody's just soft. They don't want to face anything head on.
And that's not necessarily like the issue, but I find it's that lack of like way we view history and education, and we approach it. It leads to a lot of misconceptions,
right?
And that as we'll delve into some other things as we proceed, it's these are very much real. When people are like, some politicians are like, I don't want to commit political suicide and like advancing this type of agenda or like approaching this problem. It's like, well, then you realize that like your political career is valuable in someone's life.
Do you feel that that's the hurdle, that their career is going to be in jeopardy if they try and push some of these things along, and that's where people aren't doing it? Like they're just
it's like
picking their livelihood over the lives of
it's
several others.
Case in point is like in New Brunswick with Blaine Higgs, he's fear mongering the settler population and saying that like Indigenous Aboriginal title or land claim will impact like your home. It's like, no, we're not taking other people's homes. That's colonialism. What we're trying to reaffirm is that yes, this land we have claim to this, and how do we share it in terms of moving forward and from the lens of the government, not the citizen. And that was very inappropriate for that party to do in that institution, because what it does is it portrays us as people who are either money hungry, or
everybody is
that's the capital. We're
capitalists, right?
and precisely, and he even raised points of like, in terms of a tax revenue sharing agreement in New Brunswick, he was upset that when the deal was signed in 1999, it only generated $24,000 in revenue, and that's at least this recent year, until it was scrapped recently, it generated $44 million.
Oh.
And so then
it's a big increase.
And then now it's like, that should be going to fund off the provincial programs. It's like, but we made that money. And then particularly with like Madawaska First Nation, it's like they make a lot of money because they're close to the border. And I was like, they're like, that's not fair. And it's like, but you placed our reserve there. You put us there.
Right. We didn't choose.
No. And so now you're mad and you want to go back on your deal? That seems kind of hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of that going on. I mean, it's like rob Peter to pay Paul, and then it's like, oh, well, that was too good. We want it back now.
And it's like a misconception too. It's like that money doesn't go to one community. It gets dispersed through our nation and goes to actually supplement the inadequate funding from the Fed government.
Right. So it sounds like you guys are actually using money properly, whereas our government just takes our money and spends it on what they feel like they should. Sorry, maybe I'm overstepping.
Not necessarily, because we are still like, we're operating in a model of government that was never designed by us.
Okay.
So it's like through the Indian Act. And so we never...
Can you elaborate on that?
And so...
What is the Indian Act for people that wouldn't know about it?
Okay, so about 10 years after Confederation, so what would it be...
Sorry if this is throwing you off.
No, it's so in Canada became a nation in 1886 or...
I think somewhere around. I'd have to go. Hey Google, when did Canada become a nation?
July 1st, 1867.
1867.
On the website len.bc.ca.
Take that, Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie.
North America.
Okay, Google, stop.
And so 10 years later, there was a piece of legislation called the Indian Act. And what it outlined was essentially asserted the Crown or the Canadian government the authority over Indigenous people's everyday life. And that means how we were governed, where we live, everything. In terms of who got status, what does it mean to have status? And so there's like components of it that are assimilatory, sexist, and that we're still living in. Like that document is still in place. But within that, it's like we have a right to have a local band and chief and council, but it used to be illegal for other communities to get lawyers to file land claims. It was illegal for us, to practice our culture. There were simply components of it that didn't allow us to have Maui Omis or powwows.
What are those? Sorry for my
So a Maui Omi or a powwow is essentially like a gathering,
okay.
Where we come and celebrate life together, share dance, ceremony, song. We just come together as communities, and it's a way to share our culture. But Indigenous people come across all over Turtle Island or North America to take part in this, and it's a part of like selling our gifts of art and song and dance.
And this is not allowed.
It used to not be. And so there was up until like 1955, and there's a particular reason for that. But and within that, the government states that like who can run. It used to be like only men can run for council, only men can be chief, and
right.
Or like
very similar to our
yeah. And like even like there was a component of it like a white man can't run for council, but he could run for chief.
Oh.
And so that was a way for because that's something like that the Japanese did when they colonized and in their imperialistic era of the Pacific, and that's why you see like in Korea, they would actually oppress the people by not putting them in leadership positions and not having them hone that skill to then pass it on. And so like that's why you see like when they divided the country, they created that vacuum.
Right.
And so it's like that was able for the spread of communism and all those things and dictatorships. But not to get off topic, but that's a kind of
it's a whole nother bag.
That's
bag of worms, right?
Potentially going with like my PhD if I pursue it is like colonialism at a global scale.
Okay.
Which is like quite interesting. But that piece of legislation, which is still enacted, outlines what the government has to do in terms of like, because we're still considered wards of the state, like. We're still like not dependents, and it's like, how do we get ourselves out from that? So, essentially, to circle back, it's, the way we govern was predetermined for us. Like we were denied the opportunity to form our own political system, develop our own economy, our own diplomatic relations, and like having that kind of foundation. So it's like, essentially it was a piece of legislation that enabled the federal government to establish the reserve system, to segregate us geographically from our other nations. So it's like it created a lot of things, and it actually gave them the authority to operate and run residential schools. So the main intention of that act and that system was to, we were considered the white man's burden, or the Indian problem, as Sir John A. put it, and it was means to assimilate us, because at the time, Indigenous status was linked to practicing your culture and language. And so by definition, they found that process to, if you no longer speak your language and you no longer practice your culture, you are assimilated, you are now Canadian. So then therefore you don't have status.
Right.
And then, so
therefore, it's like a way to work it out of you.
And then therefore, if there's no status Indigenous people or status Indians, those treaties that were signed
are no longer.
Well, there's no other people to claim that.
Right.
And then they have all that land. That was because once you see a confederation, that Western expansion was a huge component, because there was a fear of the Americans coming up and.
Yeah, so that's where you say it's been like systematized to,
it's all,
kind of work you guys out of the, out of your heritage and your ancestry and your,
It was two-pronged. It was like the cultural side, and it's like particularly and for women, like say Indigenous women, if they married a non-Indigenous man,
it's just
lost your status.
Right.
But if a man married a non-Indigenous woman, he could actually give her status.
Oh.
And then you actually have that blood quantum, and that bloodline deteriorates, and over time they just become. It was a means to encourage that and dilute. And I don't mean to sound like a eugenics movement or anything, or
no, I get it.
But it's just and that was the mindset then. It was if they over time, if the Indigenous men mate with non-Indigenous women, they become half, and then half comes quarter comes nothing.
So this is probably a great kind of segue, to throw in. I'm Acadian. We've kind of talked about this a couple of times. We've met, in the last little bit.
Yep.
And we have a bit of commingling kind of history where we were kind of deported along the coast, and not to say I can relate to any of the travesties on your end, but on my grandmother's side, on the Muses, they very much were kind of commingling. And anyway, I have my Métis status card here.
Nice.
So I'm part of I probably can't. Can you? How would you say that properly so I don't butcher it and offend anyone?
I can't say that.
You can't?
I don't know what that one is, because it's my writing system is different.
Oh.
But in terms of that's a lived reality, right? And that's the same for a large portion of the African Nova Scotian population. Many people I talk to are realizing that they are Mi'kmaq, and they're understanding why, because even at the time, it was worse to be Indigenous than it was Black.
Oh.
They weren't taking, Black children, forcing them into schools and, abusing them, or, as we've seen out West, killing them, malnourishing them, and burying them in a backyard.
So nobody wanted to know.
Oh, it was better to be Black instead of being Black and Indigenous. And then so they gave the government the authority to take your children.
See, my uncle, it was probably over 10 years ago. Well, yeah, I would have had this card for a while. Anyway, I don't know who decided to, but they did it was before 20, that DNA kind of.
Yeah, 23andMe.
Is that what it's called? Yeah,
all that stuff.
So anyway, it was before that, so they started tracking down the family tree, and then they tracked the lineage, and they're like, oh yeah, we actually all up to here have, some Métis.
Yeah.
So, they started just getting all our paperwork in to say that we are, and I know they thought it was a good thing, so we all did it.
Well, I think inherently, it's a good thing to know where you come from.
Absolutely.
Because you understand yourself so much more.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of who a person is, to understand where it all started, really.
But also it's then there's things about you that you can, holistically apply if you need to turn that stone, and to know no, this is how my people live. Maybe there's something right here. Maybe there's something I can apply that can actually help me now. And that was again, as the work that I've done, and working in being a support in post-secondary and social services and everything. It's helping people better understand that it's okay if you don't want to learn the language, or if you don't want to practice the culture, but no, it's always there. But it is always but it's not something that it won't choose to leave you. It won't be upset that it's not there. It will wait, and it will help you when you need it.
When you need it, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a fear around that. So by all means, but it's and that's a kind of component too. It's this narrative or propaganda that has been dispersed by the federal government of like Canada is this, is actually misleading the population, and actually as a result of that rift. Because I think if the conservative, it doesn't matter what party, I watch what goes on, and like there's more argument and like debate on so many issues, but I think in terms of reconciliation, that's one thing. Conservatives, NDP, Green, Liberal have to come together and be like, we all agree on this, and we're going to pursue this no matter what. We're going to have, tripartisan
Regardless
strategy
of our divide across other policy.
Yeah, and conservatives can't be like, oh, you can't cut that. Like, you can't cut that budget. When you talk about free market, how come we weren't allowed to participate in the free market?
Right.
Like we were actually exempt. We were segregated from globalization. So it's like that. Like our GDP is essentially half of, in community is half of what the
rest of the community,
because we have no exports.
Right.
And we're all dependent. Some communities are dependent on federal funding, which is a misconception when like the government's like, we're putting 700 million out. It's like, you realize that's for all the nations and all the First Nation communities in Canada, that we actually have to go and like fight against, like put bids in and proposals against other communities
to get a share of it.
Yeah. And so, with like, I think there's like upwards to like 150 distinct First Nation communities or more in Canada. And so it's like, actually, it's like there's even like when they put a figure out, it was like 330 million for post-secondary students or for First Nation youth to attend post-secondary. And that population is the fastest growing. And so I ballparked it. I think the math that came out, so it's like if every First Nation youth attended post-secondary, they would only get $150 from the government.
Oh, really?
But then, that misconception, you guys get all this money. You guys,
they don't look at how dispersed it is.
Well, because like, I'm looking at it from a macro level, and it's like,
yeah, everybody looks like this.
Oh yeah. And so,
what did I read right here? That's what it says.
Yeah.
It's like they don't know or understand like the inner workings of things. Like people just kind of walk around with their eyes closed.
Because if you don't know, you don't know.
Well, what you don't know, definitely don't know. That's for sure.
And I just want to know more. I want to know why. I want to know the why.
Well, this is very much why I do this. I like to learn, and I like to know about, culture, people's backgrounds, what drives them. I mean, it's if you don't want to learn about, what are you doing? I don't know.
Well, and I think that's like a good segue into like, the work I do and have done.
Yeah, well, exactly. What have you been doing?
So in the past, essentially 2 years, I have been working in post-secondary. So I work with NSCC and St. Mary's University as as a culture and community liaison for NSCC. So I supported, 7 campuses directly of the cultural support, and that was for the students who didn't have a advisor there. And then half the time was then working at the central campus and like helping being the point of contact for all the Mi'kmaq communities and sharing information, making sure, communication was perfect, and also leading some strategy from a central standpoint. Then I transitioned back to, that's when I started my master's part-time during the pandemic, because I was like, this is the perfect time to do it.
Right, let's dig in.
It's online.
Right.
I was like, let's do it. I was like, I want to have no open time.
Man, I wish I would have dug into something a little. I was doing my real estate license, I guess, but it was like I wanted to stab my eyes out with a fork.
Yeah.
Like it was so boring.
I know. And that's why it's like going into a master's thesis, it was like I actually had so much autonomy. Why I'm writing it, what's the purpose, what's the scope, and
it
was
like very much what was in you, driving you.
Yeah. And but I did that. I'm doing it part-time, and then I transitioned to St. Mary's University, and that was a huge, I wouldn't say honor. I looked at that opportunity to not only give something back, because like when I was there at SMU, I didn't know there was any other Indigenous people. I didn't know if there's any other Indigenous students or student athletes. Mm-hmm. And that essentially that year we're able to, ensure that our rights were upheld, that we provided accurate information, that we provided the highest quality of service that we could with the means that we had, but also just to be accessible. Like
they had somebody they could count on, rely on,
be there every day, and and just to my doors open. But I had an out the door policy, so I was like around campus. I would talk to people and looking beyond the year. And essentially,
how do you mean?
So
beyond the year of the student.
yeah, beyond the time at time at SMU. So it's like,
Right.
like I wish someone sat me down. My first year was like, football's not forever, and I would have been like, go
Oh,
on.
20-year-old
Don't
Chris would have told you same thing. Like whatever I was into then, be like, this ain't gonna be it. I'd be like,
whatever.
get out of here.
Yeah, I'm
bro.
the best.
I'm going back to the gym.
Going, yeah. Don't worry about it. But it's like sitting down and be like, hey, like, don't rely on these things, and like talking about like what I missed out on. And it's like, experiential learning and networking, and finding your passion, because it's like we all have gifts, right? And we all have skills and interests, but how do we then combine them? Because it's like I almost went to do a Bachelor of Education,
Right.
and I'm fortunate enough that I didn't, because I had an opportunity to work at like an at-risk high school. And I learned real quick. I was like, I don't have the patience to like.
Right.
I was like, dude, like the answer's right there. I'm like, you're lying to me, like dog. So it's like, I'm glad I didn't do that. And I was like, well, I wanted to be the approach I took, and I wasn't. I like to say I'm not a company person. I'm a community person. So it's like when I'm in an institution, I'm there to support my community. I'm going to be community centered. I'm going to be student centered. And when there's crisis, I want to be survivor centered. I'm not going to protect the institution. I'm not going to protect the people who were accountable or responsible. We are going to have the conversation. We're going to lean into friction, because yes, it may have occurred and it may have been brought to our attention, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. Like, this is just the first case we're hearing.
Right.
And like it took a long time to build that rapport. And I was like, the more I learned and the more, particularly post-secondary, and being a master's student as well, these are some of the most colonial institutions, and by all means, this is across the country, because you got to. Like what I learned was like, universities have been imported here. It's a European construct.
Well, we're all starting to learn a little bit, even on like my end, of like what the school system's really,
J.D.
put out
Rockefeller
there,
to
right?
have like workers,
and employees, nice,
and
nice,
to be obedient,
compliant employees,
and not to think big picture. And so,
but that's what we're talking about when because like the big picture dream back when I was growing up was like, because I wanted to go lobster fishing. I don't care if my old man ever sees this episode, and I know that's a controversial topic, and we don't have to talk about it, but
that could be another one.
Right, we can do another one on that, exactly. But like, I was very much, I'd see Dad go and come, and he was the man, and he was the captain, and he also was he had his own electrical outfitting. He was just like the one guy did it in the off season.
Yeah,
and like that was it. That was for me. And I loved it. I liked the physical work. Like, I liked being physically tired. I don't know. It was just like fulfilling. And him and my grandfather, Grampy, like guy right there, was like, nope, you don't want to do that. It's too hard on you. You need to go to school, get a university education, not college.
No.
It's not good enough.
I know, right? There's a bias. That's
right?
a misconception.
I know. Terrible.
Yeah.
Because I would have did better in trades. Like, I wasn't a good student. Like, I need this interaction stuff. I can't just read books and listen. Anyway, I say ADHD. I'm actually doing a questionnaire, but yeah, I definitely wasn't a great student. So I was kind of like, almost like, I don't want to use the term brainwashed, because it was just like what my parents thought was best. It was like university, job with a pension and
security
and benefits.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
and it's like. And that's awesome for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's just like, I don't know, there must be like a better way, to like figure out how to get there.
Well, like, I come to realize that like I don't like being oppressed.
Right.
And like, especially when it's like, I learned and I believe that.
You mean like somebody's like boasting to you or something?
Micromanage, and I'm like, whoa. Like, especially around.
I had to deal with one of those the other day. Yeah.
Well, especially like in like the work I do, it's like I'm always Indigenous focused.
Right.
And I'm like, to a non-Indigenous person tell me I'm doing something wrong, I was like, I forgot more about being Indigenous that you'll ever learn.
Right.
Like, Indigenous lived experience is relevant experience, and you have to account for that. But what I've learned is that, these institutions were, it used to be, if we went back 50 years and outlined in the Indian Act, I would have lost my status because I was too educated.
Right.
I'm deemed too civilized.
Sorry to laugh, but that's just terrible.
Yeah. And so it's like that kind of overtone's still there. And it's a challenging place, and I understand it more. But when I was like younger, I was just, my blinders were on. I was like, I'll play football, I'll just do the credit, I'll graduate, and then I'll figure it out then.
Right.
So it's like working with
you just
students.
want to get to where you wanted to be.
I was like,
forgot about the rest.
And I was just like, that's why I'm here. And but then
Backburnered it. Sorry.
Yeah, I put it in the back of my mind. I was like, I'm just gonna push through, power down. I'll just wait till next season. That's the fun part.
Right. Yeah.
That 8 weeks.
It's a lot of misconception. Like I found myself doing too, like pushing stuff off. Like I had all this time, but
no.
My wife thinks we have all this time. Now I operate like I'm running out like yesterday.
Well, and
I mean, for better or for worse, I don't know. But it drives me, right?
I just want to get. There's things I want to do that can help more people. That kind of like led me to a big transition in my life. So I'm no longer at the university.
Right.
I'm very excited to be starting to work with KPMG.
Nice. KPMG?
Yeah.
So that was the big change.
Yeah. So
okay,
I've never worked in for profit or in the private sector. And so what attracted me to that was the not only impressed about where they are as an organization, but what they're committed to, and talking with other people in that industry and learning that, these are the people who can help our communities. These are the people who can help us be economically sustainable and independent. And they have the connections, they have the know-how, they have the resources, and also in terms of, advancing their reconciliation strategy. It's creating an environment where Indigenous people can go into non-Indigenous sectors or non-traditional sectors. And so it's like, even in my time in post-secondary, it's like, I'm quite observant like how people are, because I want to see what you do before I go and act and try to change things.
100%.
And I noticed that it's always like for Indigenous people in education pathways, it's like you can go into social work, education, and law, but there's never like tech or STEM. And
what's STEM?
Science.
I've been out of the academia for a while, so I don't got the acronyms.
It would just be like essentially like science, engineering, mathematics.
Okay, so that kind of band of stuff.
Oh yeah, that. That's where we're going into like technology.
The smart people.
Oh yeah, those nerds.
Right.
Nerds. I'm a different kind of nerd.
Right. I couldn't. Yeah, I love that people that can do
engineering
that.
Is like. Yeah. I wish I could. But that's something where I'm seeing a lot of youth are so interested in being involved in the tech sector, and it's like
it's been a big spurt there.
They need to see that it is a pathway, that there are pathways, and that there's ways that we can get there. And with KPMG, it's providing that kind of pathway. It's like, no, you can work in the corporate sector, you can go and operate in like these different fields, and like it's let's be individual focused. Like if we run like an Indigenous recruitment internship program, like I want to bring them in and being like, where do you want to be? Like, what's your interest? And like, well, let's have you dabble. Like, let's see where you were passionate. Cause then it's like, boom, like once I found like how I like to operate, and it's like kind of segueing into, it's like, I got to the point where it's like, I'm launching my own advisory firm. And so,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah. And so, because I didn't like, I don't like the word consultation, because that's like a one-off. And so it's like,
right, because it's like a one-time thing. Like, you're getting a consultation, and then
when we check that box,
we're done.
Like, we're not doing that. I was like, I don't do that. That's not how I operate. Because like I take the approach of, and like my company or firm is called the Wabanaki Group, and so the reason why I named it like that is because this country, this nation was kind of born out of the Wabanaki region. Mm-hmm. So we're the people of the dawn. We actually see the sunrise first. So each day starts with us. And then as the day goes, like these things can have a ripple effect across the country. And
right.
And that's how I want to view it. Cause it's like, and it's just incredibly important because even the name is a tool to educate people. And like, oh, what does the Wabanaki mean? And I can go into that and like, as I did in the beginning.
Right.
And to showcase that, like, we did have a complex system of government. We actually had political ties. We had political systems. But, within that, it helped. I want to help other organizations, doesn't matter what sector, It's to have, you know, meaningful engagement, meaningful collaboration, because there's a big misconception that like, you know, if you work with Indigenous communities that you have to give up something. It's like, no one has to lose.
I don't know why anybody would have that.
Yeah. And I take this is something I've learned from working with like, very people I hold in high esteem, and being, you know, from an Indigenous lens. It's like, I'm not looking at, you know, the next quarter. I'm not looking at the next year. I want to ensure things are in place that can be stable for 30 years.
Well, that's really refreshing to hear, because I think, you know, when you look at any other organization, I mean, I come from that too, like, you know, the consumer goods corporate sector, it's always about the month. And then when it's not about the month, it's about the week.
Yeah.
And there's even like, you know, sometimes midweek, it's like, how we doing?
Yeah.
And then it's like the quarter, how'd the quarter go? How'd half mid-year?
Yeah.
How are we trending for the back half?
Yeah.
What's year to date?
What's
year
our
to
forecast?
go? What do we forecast? Then we're starting in 20. It's all so short-sighted that nobody's looking at the big picture. I found like that's all across the board.
Yeah.
Politics. What can I do to make sure I get voted in?
Yeah.
For the next 4 years.
And how do I play into like my consensus or like my constituents? And
it's
like,
not about 30 years out. It's about how, and I get it. You got to look out for number one to a degree. But like, if you're in a role where you can make an impact, like, you know, like you're saying, then it can't just be about the, like you say, the month or the quarter or the next year. It's macro scale.
Oh, it's just like, if I can build something that outlasts me, that's success. If I don't need to be there,
like a legacy.
And it's just like, these are principles. This is how we've done it. And it's like, I always took the approach of saying I want to have proactive policy development and not reactive policy.
Of course.
And what does that mean? It means, you know, we got to
opening your eyes and looking at what's going on. Yeah.
Listening, not listening, but hearing people.
Yeah.
You know, we've, you know, for so long, it's like operating. It's like, we know what's best for you. It's like, you have no idea what's best for us.
Right.
And
people operate like the government does know that. And I think we've seen time and time again the last few years that they're definitely not the people that we should be going to all the time.
I think there needs to be more of transparency. I think there needs to be like, I'm concerned around who are you affiliated with?
Right.
Because it's like the big thing I saw, you know, we see, you know, our education system's struggling, our health system's struggling.
Yeah, definitely.
But then the provincial government gives Irving a tax break for non-taxing shipbuilders.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well then, or, you know, you can have TAs who give them non-tax exempt, give nurses tax exemption. Then you actually see more people and qualified people go in the field, and they actually can provide them income. And
maybe we have some kind of infrastructure that can service our communities.
But it's just like, it's like, you know, Irving's got enough.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
That's another thing. But that's one of the things I saw. It's like, you know, you should vote. That should come to, you know, like, hey, we're looking at having this program put in place. It's like, how does that help our you know, our education system, our healthcare system that helps the province?
Right.
But you give this tax break, and it's like,
or like, why do we have to build a ferry with a $14-15 million library attached to it?
You know, is it feasible?
Who voted for that?
Yeah. Like, I would, like, that's one thing in our Indigenous communities that, like, I'm advocating for, and I'm trying to hold particularly my community, where, you know, they work for me. And that's some big misconceptions. Like, you know, we elected you. We're paying your salary. You actually work for us.
Right.
You're not.
There's a lot of that going on. Like, we're just going to do whatever we want with your money, and you're just going to let us. And it's just like, a lot of people have been kind of waking up to that, I think, and been like, hey.
Well, it's like, I like to play that.
Our money's devaluing, and you're giving more money away to anybody that screams loud enough.
I know. And I think there needs to be, you know, what are the root causes, and why do we need this? You know, I think it's always investing in education.
Well, you know, in the corporate sector too, you spend one of their dollars, they need to know.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Oh, it's signed off.
Where you spent it, how you drank it,
yeah.
If it's coffee, whatever,
why,
and like, you know, you better be, you know, lock, stock, and barrel on that, or they're coming for you.
Oh yeah, just deduct it from you,
right?
Yeah.
Or you do it, too big of an expense, no proper reasoning, you might get fired.
Oh yeah.
Where's the accountability on the other end? Like, all this money, they're taking our money.
Well, it's the same thing with
and then they're just spending it.
Oh.
They don't tell us.
Oh no.
There's no like statement
I want to know why you spent. Like, just tell me why, and being like, if you can articulate it, give me like 5 good reasons. I'd be like,
right.
So-
It's like this carbon tax, for instance. The environment. Yeah, guess what? I care a lot about the environment too.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me where all this carbon
is
tax,
it go back into green energy, or
where's it going?
is it like
I want a statement, a report at the end of the month where you took all this carbon tax money,
yeah,
and I want to know what we're doing to improve
the environment?
our planet. Yeah.
Where is this getting allocated?
Where's
to?
it going?
Or is it going to?
Why is nobody asking this?
Because
Everybody's just like, yeah, well, we'll just give Trudeau this carbon tax, and I guess that's going to help.
Because we're preoccupied, dude. Like, some people get like kids, and I'm like, oh shit, that sucks. I don't know if I can swear or not, but like,
Yeah, go ahead. That's
but
something we should swear about.
but
I
it's just
think.
oh, don't, but it's the same thing in the Indigenous community.
I know, man.
If you're not following the news, like, our AFN chief just got voted out because, she's calling for a forensic audit of the organization.
For what?
So the Assembly First Nations is essentially like our national chief,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have like regional chiefs underneath that like support our region, so like our needs are met, and like they can act, and like they can have Fed, like her mandate is to work collaboratively with the Fed, and so
there was no
so but like for years, right? So it's like there's the national chief, then there's the CEO of the AFN who like operationally, and so she was essentially calling for a forensic audit of how the money was being spent within the organization, because for years, like, we operate in our Indigenous communities is just incredibly corrupt. It is, by all means, it's not perfect.
Wow,
because
it's perfect on our end.
Well,
either,
like, we don't
right?
have term, like in my community, there's no term limits,
right,
and we're on
so you can just keep getting voted.
Yeah, and that what that does, and we're on 2-year election cycles.
Oh,
so like, yeah, you're worried about if you bring something up that's not popular.
you only got a year.
You have a year to make it viable, and then so it's like people don't want to get their name on things that could be a like people.
So that's where that short term comes in, eh?
And it's a borderline authoritarian.
Right.
I'm like, that's a dictatorship, and that there's no opportunity. It's like, you can't be in council for 30 years, and I was like, where's your strategic plan? What things have you championed? What work have you done?
So it wasn't community focused on their end.
Well, that's because that structure was never intended to be community focused in mind,
right?
And so there's,
because ours isn't either.
No, like, I would love to have public forums. I would love to have an assembly where it's like all our MLAs come and being like, this is what I'm like, they have to come to the constituents. You're like, this is what I'm doing, like, earn your, like, I want to see you work. Like, I get performance reviews. Who conducts yours? I think you should come to the community, and we could like and like, and you know what,
tally the tape here. What have you said
also,
you're gonna do? What have you done?
Yeah, and
did you do it good?
Yeah, and what but also, what did you learn?
Yeah, and where can we improve?
And how do you instill confidence? Because
Yeah,
right now it's like
there's not much.
well, it's like in anything I do, I try to instill confidence in what I do and why I do it, and to articulate why. And because then it's like, no, then we can actually have more proactive conversations on how we get to that. And if that doesn't work right now, well, what can we do to do that? And so, and that's like a big component of my master's is focusing on the Marshall decision, which you probably would be aware of.
Right.
And how it didn't decide anything. Like, the Supreme Court of Canada came down and laid down this decision of like, yeah, this is all affirmed, but it's like, what does that mean? It's like, yeah, we have treaty rights, but how does that coexist with the commercial fishery?
Right.
And then also the fact that now the UN has recognized what Indigenous rights are, and Canada actually, not only did Canada vote against that international legislation in 2007, but now the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People has passed the Royal Assessment, so it's becoming federal law, which it outlines that Indigenous people have the right to self-determination, which means we're the masters of our destiny. We get to dictate how our lives are lived out, and also that we have the right to autonomy and autonomous function, and we actually get to we are an integral part of those decisions that affect our autonomy, including financing our autonomy. And so what I'm arguing in my thesis is that that decision completely needs to be re-examined. And so, like, because it's a huge misconception where the Department of Fisheries says they have the authority to regulate treaty rights. this is not a regulation issue. It is a rights issue. It is my inherent human right, which is protected by the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with the quota. And so if it's addressed the appropriate way, we talked about this prior. It's like,
right.
What does it look like? It's like, well, we actually have to look at it that way instead of being like, oh, you can only fish to have a moderate livelihood. It's like, why don't we have a modern one? That's on par with non-Indigenous fishermen. Well. And also, no one's defined moderate livelihood. Does it mean that it's the average salary or household income on reserve, which is half of what the average household income is off reserve? Or is it means to individual center-based, family-based, to provide subsistence for a family of 5? What is that? What is that number? What's a family of 4?
Yeah, there's really been no work on that, eh?
No, not for 20 years. And that's why we keep running into this issue. It's like, okay.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Oh, and also, when non-Indigenous fishers and the federal government too, in 2003 in the Burnt Church crisis, and they did it multiple times, they actually violated the Peace and Friendship Treaty, which states that, like, we will not molest. Molest, it means like adhere or like deter you.
We're not supposed to hurt each other.
Yeah, and when we wouldn't molest settlers in establishing new settlement without consultation or collaboration, and then also that we would not be molested, and this is just the language of the treaty.
Yeah.
Because it's all ingrained here. But we won't be molested in exercising our treaty right of fishing and hunting. But what does that mean now when that actually has happened? Mm-hmm. And so that should be the first thing. It's like it's terrifying, and we're calling for military support. And no one comes. Right. Like, people are getting hurt. Women, children. Like, women are on those protest lines. Like, our community members are there. They're trying to feed their family because like those systemic barriers are still in place. And like,
yeah, definitely, we've seen it for sure.
But like, I think that's why it motivated me to like approach this, legislation in the way I have, is to create a system that is dynamic. That means it can evolve and change, and can be enabled to do what it was intended to do. It means to support the First Nation community in protecting our rights, instead of a static system that is in place to kick the can down the line. Right. Like, we're still...
These are the rules forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, it's like,
it's not how it works.
Like, and it's protected by the Constitution.
I know.
And so it's like, well, and then they want to go back and like kind of dictate it. It's like, well, let's go back and... it's like it can go both ways. And if you want to amend our treaty, no, that doesn't mean it doesn't get abolished. We just let's have a new deal.
Yeah, let's go back.
Let's come to the table. And it's
needs have changed.
The game's changed.
Yeah.
And what's fair? It's like, what's the quota set at for the country?
Yeah. How's the biomass of the lobster looking?
And you know what? We get half of that quota. So it's like, say if it's like 300 tons, it's like, all right, 150 tons is allocated for the Mi'kmaq fishery. And if we don't meet that quota, you know what? Then we set that aside. Or you can buy back, we can then allocate that over, or then, but there's no process like that. It's like, that's in some instances in the States, they said, nope, some nations have half. They get half of that resource. Because it's like, or we can just go and fish as much as we want, but it's like, that's not our way. But I think there needs to be this is a historical and a contemporary issue, and we actually have to acknowledge, first of all, like, go all the way back and say the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoqiyik are sovereign nations. And what makes a nation? It's having a shared geography. Mm-hmm. We have that. We have a shared culture, and we have a shared language, a common language, and borders. Right. So we are a nation. And so we actually have to have diplomatic ties and diplomatic and respects, because it's like, you have to treat us as delegates. And I firmly believe that, because like, once that approach and views applied, you would see it come to the table with respect, and that, we should be a part of the UN, because then we can actually impose sanctions. Because like right now, it's like, what does the government do? They're like, on the internet, we're boards of the state, so we don't have that. Right. And so there needs to be like, so it's like in NATO, it's like, it's a Peace and Friendship Treaty is Atlantic Treaty. How come we can't call upon, and that treaty is with the Great Britain. Right. How come they don't step in? and say like, why are you oppressing these people? Why are you violating? Because like a treaty right is a human right, so our human rights are being violated,
Right.
and it's essentially a crime against humanity. But you know, when a European nation is under distress, the whole world, because you know, they're like, oh my God, look at these people.
I know. Well,
You know, it's the same thing too. It's like they call the Holocaust a genocide. You know, the same things the federal government did. They segregated us. They took our children. They killed some, but they also track us by numbers, like status numbers, and a means to oppress us and make sure what we do. And it's the same thing. It's
Right.
all just trying to like, you know, as we, you know, plow through this, it's, you know, with everything going on, as you said, it's like you kind of proposed to me with a big question. It was like, what are we doing well?
Well, that's what was my next question is like, what are we doing well right now? And like, you know, where can we improve? And
Well, like I was like, wolf, like that's a big question for a Saturday, Chris. I was like, where do we begin such
well, I just like name maybe a few things. You don't have to.
well, it's like, what do you define as well?
Well, things that would be positive actions towards like, you know,
So
reassimilation in like a good way, like in terms of like not reassimilation, that's not a good word, but like you know, how do we come to the table and make everything, you know, fair and equitable? Like,
Yeah.
you know, isn't that, you know, kind of what we're here for, like in general as a population? Like we're all on this big blue rock together,
yeah.
flying through space. So
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy to me that people just can't kind of collaborate, come together, and like get a solution that works for everybody. But it's all, you know, at the end of the day, it's all greed and money, and that's what it is. It's like,
Yeah.
well, nobody wants to let go of anything for anybody else but themselves, and then that's just, you know, where we get stuck, I think. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, has there been any improvement, like on like, well, we have this, and you know, we feel like, you know. I don't mean to use the fishing thing as an example, but it's like, you know, this is something that is
Yeah.
like federally controlled, and you know, you guys want the moderate like, has there, you know,
Nothing.
yeah,
Isn't like in
none in that area, but maybe in some other spheres, has there been any advancement on?
I can confidently say that, you know, it's a hard thing to portray, but it's actually been the same.
So it's just been kind of stagnant.
But they, you know, they use the term reconciliation has just been a buzzword now.
Well, that's why I asked, because it's like it's been like a, you know, we put the holiday in, and it's like, well, what are we actually doing?
I'm all for the days of recognition. Like, that's why I'm happy to be here after June,
right?
Because it's like, you know, for me, I talk to people, so you know, every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. It's like every day is Indigenous History Day. Like I live that, and so, in terms of like, I think we should just, you know, that's like the basis of my business is like, why do you want to do this, but what does it mean to you, and are you meeting that, and write it down, because those are your words and your principles and how you approach this, and you need that. It needs to be centered to you, because my vision of reconciliation is not yours, nor is it anyone's, and so it varies across the country. And so how do we essentially, it's I've come to the conclusion that it took about 300 years to get to this point, right? It's going to take roughly 700 to get us out,
To get us back to where we think we need to be, you think?
into be, because it's a lifelong journey. We have to approach this as a lifelong commitment to, you know, acknowledging our past, decolonizing ourselves, decolonizing our nation, and reestablishing that nation to nation relationship, and to coexist peacefully. Because I think in essence, you know, in the name peace and friendship, is that's how our every single issue or every single conversation should be based on. First, well, are we going to have peace, and how do we build upon the friendship? How is that the outcome? Instead of being like, you know, you're going to be happy with your X amount of percent. It's like, no, we're not here. We're here to establish diplomatic ties. You get your house in order. We'll ensure our community abides by what we lay down. And also it's like reestablishing too, like as a community, it's like we used to, the chief, used to have to hear every voice in the community. And that means youth and elders and not someone who's 18. It was like, what do the children want and what's the best informed decision? And then and if they can articulate why it's a good process or a good decision, the community votes on it. And like some communities only have like 1,000 people. So it's like, that's your job, is to consult with us and collaborate with our communities. Like, I never asked to be oppressed. I never asked to be assimilated. So it's like, in some instances, I don't even recognize, my chief and council, because it's like, you're a remnant. You're a tie over from the colonial era. You are this system is essentially colonial, and you don't talk to us. You don't know what the needs are. You don't know what kids want to know, where our interests lie, and also what are the needs of, like, it varies so much. And so
would you say the basic step one is just like communication?
I think it's ongoing commitment to communication. So it's like, well, it's first and foremost, it's, stop appointing non-Indigenous people to be ministers of our affairs.
Yeah, it seems a little
counterproductive. And
counterintuitive for sure.
And like also in terms of like participating in local and provincial and federal government, we need to redesign, where our ridings. So it's like, particularly like in my community, we are very fortunate that, I say fortunate, but we're in the city of Fredericton. So we're within the municipality, but yet we're zoned with different neighborhoods. And so it's like non-Indigenous people represent our community in local affairs. What I'm advocating for is that my community, St. Mary's First Nation, be rezoned, and actually only a person who resides in that community, who is a community member, can be voted in. And then what that does is then it always has an Indigenous person
looking out for the Indigenous
and then the same thing for the provincial MLA and federally. And so it's like, no. And then if you see that across the country, it's like, oh, then you'll actually have Indigenous people in the room. And then Trudeau or whomever, Houston, Blaine Higgs, doesn't matter. There will always be an Indigenous person in government from the community who can then take that role of Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Minister of Innu Affairs, and that it's done the right way, and that they come from the community, like, I know what's going on. And they can be like, because it's like, once you're in and once you see what's going on, you're like, oh my goodness. And it's like, it's like some people, it's like, I'm like, do you want to know?
Sounds like a pretty reasonable approach to me.
Well, like, and you set that in place, then you actually, because it's like it's a hard thing. It's like, for example, it's like if I were to run for office, I'd have to talk to non-Indigenous people. They're like, oh, you're just going to advocate for Indigenous issues. I'm like, well, yes and no.
Right.
But that's a hard conversation.
It's tough. Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm looking and I'm like, you don't know, like, a jury of my peers, like, that's not my peers.
Right.
And so it's like, how can we have we can never have, until we get to that point, that's just, that would be a starting point. And I view it as like, it's acknowledging that what is currently happening is not the truth. And so it's like,
I think there's a lot of,
so it's like, they're like, we're committed to reconciliation. I'm like, what is your commitment?
right.
Like, tell me what you're able to commit now and long term. What's the goal? We need to constantly redefine what our definition of excellence is or success is.
Don't you find there's too much of that bandwagon crap too? Like, oh, we're all for it. It's like, okay, cool. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm like, well,
the same with like reconciliation, or like, everybody hung the flag for Ukraine in their window. And it's like,
you're not going over there.
It's like
we
all support. It's like, okay, cool. Did you donate? What did you do?
Are you going there?
No, you just want to hang the damn flag in your window because you want to tell everybody else you did it.
It's for clout. And
That's too much of that crap.
And I'm like, like the people I work with in different capacities, like with P4G and, it's like, in the Wanderers too.
Well, companies do it too, man.
Oh, and I'm like, hey, like, selling orange shirts is great. It raises awareness. It's great. But when there's when there's an exchange of money, where's the money going?
Where is it?
Oh yeah. And how much are you making?
Right. How much of it is going to the right places, and how much do you take? I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying for anything, and not the orange shirts.
And so, but it's, and say, what is the truth? And what is the truth is that this was a genocide. This is a crime against humanity. Who's to be accountable for it? How do we put things in place that this doesn't happen again? And I feel like until we have that conversation, and until that's been a part of the agenda, until that's been always in the conversation, like that always has to be a part of anything. So it's like, oh, the carbon tax, how does that impact the Indigenous community? We are, Millbrook sells a lot of gas.
Right.
That's like, well, we didn't want to take, that's against our like beliefs of, maintaining balance with the nature. So it's like, should we be able to exempt from that carbon tax and charge gas lower? Like, and
I don't think that carbon tax should exist to start with.
But like, it's like all these things, it's like, it's never at the forefront of like, but how does it impact the Indigenous community locally, nationally? And until we're always considered, not an afterthought, I think that's where we'll actually start seeing improvement. Because like even in New Brunswick, like I'll always speak to my nation and what happens, because I will never say I know, like I can never say, I will never give you false knowledge. But what I can say is like, that's what happens in New Brunswick. It's like, we're always an afterthought. It's like, it was never taken, like, what is the ramifications if we do this? It's like, hey, is this deal good? Does it work for you? Does it help you? Is there, how do we improve this deal? Instead of like the government just scrapped it without giving notice too. They violated. It's like, why doesn't the Fed step in and being like, what are you doing? Like, I've never seen like the people, like some people who are in office. I'm like, how can they like, I don't like saying this, but it's like some politicians, and particularly in New Brunswick, are racist, but yet no one cares. And it's like, that's terrifying. It's like, we've been able to see that. And it starts with, education, and how do we, cause it's like, I didn't know what a prime minister was until I went to high school. I was like, I don't need to know that. I was like, I'm, learning, I'm sovereign, ski Janug, I'm Indigenous, Willisquake.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I had no interest in any of it for the longest time.
And it's complex. It's meant to be complex, so it deters people from trying to figure it out. But once you figure it out,
well, I'm in now. Like, I keep a pretty close eye.
Oh yeah, I want to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like, and I said it to like my family or whoever I work. I'm like, if you don't want my full attention.
No.
Just let me do what I love to do. Let me work with the AUS and do sport. I want to help. Like, just either you're in or you're in the way is essentially like the approach I take. It's like,
Man, me too. It's either you're in or you're out.
Yeah.
I ain't on this earth for half committed people. Like, sorry.
Yeah, you can't. There's some things you just can't sit on the fence on, and it blows my mind.
I'm going one way, and it's forward. And if you want to come with me, better keep up, because I don't got time to slow down.
Yeah, but no, I think. In asking that question, I wanted to ask you like, what do you define as well? And it's like, when you said those things, it's like, we don't do any of that. That's not, none of that's going on. So it's like,
well, and then
in reality, it's,
you don't know what you don't know, right? I had no idea. That's why I had you here, because I've always had awesome conversations, and I want to know what's going, because you hear all this stuff, you read all this stuff, and it's like, we've learned, well, you can't really rely on all that.
No. And like, I don't rely on words, because when you're giving a speech or your address, words can lead to lies, or actions lead to results.
Yeah.
And so I was like, show me what you're doing. What are you willing to do? And what's your commitment? What's the deadline?
Yeah.
Who's accountable?
Just don't say it. Write it down.
Like, make it real.
Right. Yeah.
And like, and let people do the work. Cause it's like, when I was at the institution, and like, there's by all means, there's so many great people that are on these campuses, and then within organizations, they just want to do the work. Like, let me help you. I want to do that. I'll
find like people are keeping people back from it.
And they're like, oh, we don't want to do that yet.
Yeah,
or it's like, oh, that'll raise.
We don't have money for that right now.
We'll
waste it on something else.
Yeah, it's just like, well,
useless.
Yeah, and so, it's, I think until we start having the conversation like that, it's like, and then also it's like, it'll never be good enough. I was like, it'll never be enough. I'm like,
it's tough to make up for bad decisions, for sure.
And of course, but it's like, what I can get behind is effort, and because it takes no talent, or it takes no talent to be a good person. It takes effort.
Yeah, you're right.
And like, that means doing the right things, the little things every day, and like, and abiding by them. And like, I abide by the laws. That's why they're there. And like the UN put these down, Canada reaffirmed them. It's time for us to start talking about what does that mean in self-determination, and respecting it and being like, I have to, this is law. I'm not running around killing people, and, I'm not stealing things. It's, and this is going to be law soon. And so, there needs to be a process that's what kind of motivated me to get in that space of advising is, it's coming. I think it's best to have that conversation now. And how does that fit into the long term? And are you prepared for that? And if not, it's better to have it done now instead of what happens when it passes legislation and gets enacted and it's like, boom.
Well, it's reactive, right? We're back to that reactive crap.
Yeah.
You got to get ahead of it for sure.
Oh, exactly.
Man, I think that's a great place to kind of put a pin in it. I mean, we've had a few conversations in the last few months. I've always enjoyed them. Kind of opens your eyes to, some stuff that's going on and what's not going on and where we need to kind of move forward. Because, I mean, I'm a big believer in, like, we can get somewhere where everybody has, something worth something. And, we're all, like I said, we're all on the big blue rock together. We all got to get along. There's so much bad going on that, like, I'm sure we can do a little bit of good here moving forward. And like you say, communications, step one.
And just being like, I used to not have like confidence, but I was always like very quiet. But it's like now it's, I'm comfortable with what I don't know. But what I learned is like I want to understand things, and that means it's like I gotta have the conversation. I gotta put my bias aside, and I have to go. I don't know. I'm gonna tell you right now, I don't have the answers. But what I know and how I view the world and what I've seen and all those things culminated into how I approach things. And ultimately, it's like if you want to do it right, I'll listen, and like I'll never lie to you and say like that's a great plan, cool. I'll be like, honestly, you got to start over. And that was like a thing I did with like when I teach people beating, and like sometimes it's like they're like, is this good? I'm like, cut it off, we gotta start over. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but let's just do it right. Like, be patient, do the little steps, and we'll get there. And once we're complete, we can move on. And because once it's done right, we don't have to come back to it. Or we can build it in a way that there's pathways allow for evolution. Because a lot of these things that are coming or like are deemed scare people because they think of it as a revolution, which is fast and swift and really causes like a power vacuum. But what I try to share with people is like, no, let's evolve. Like, let's evolve as a society together. Let's coexist together. And like, we can't change the past. I can never go back and change that. I can't even go back I can't go back to tomorrow.
Yeah.
But what I can do,
move forward.
What I can do is take stock of what I did wrong, what I did right, reflect, and let's plow ahead. And I'm like, I made mistakes. I'm going to mess up tomorrow. I'm going to mess up on my way home. I'm going to mess up, I probably messed up a million times in this podcast, but like, I don't care. I just know that, I'll learn from it because it's an experience.
100%.
And I'll be the better for it. And like, that was the best thing I learned actually from sports was like, my defensive coordinator, Bryce Fisher, was just like, our season's only 8 weeks. So if your football sucks, I want to tell you it sucks because we don't have time. And as you said, it's like you're learning now, there's not a lot of time. Like every second counts. And so it's like, well, if we're actually not in a position where we're making progress, it's like, I'm in the way. And so it's like, that's one of the big things I always take account of is like, am I holding it back? If it's me, I got to step away. Because it's like, there'll be a point where it's like, I'm not right for this. I was like, I got to move out. And like, we all have to have that kind of mindset. It's like, well, let's give people the opportunity. Like in my community, they always like, we want youth to be involved. It's like, well, stop hoarding these opportunities.
Right.
And actually put initiatives in first, because then we have new ideas. Then we have innovation. And then it creates more revenue and all those things. But it's like, let's invest in education in our communities. Let's invest in research and development. How do we develop as an organization? How do we develop as a community? And what does that mean? How do we have a system in place? And who are we bringing in to that just doesn't have to be Indigenous people. Like, I learn a lot from non-Indigenous people as well. Like, in terms of like starting a new business, it's like I'm talking with lawyers, I'm talking with people in the industry. I'm like, yeah, it's a share of knowledge, and like, you know what? I don't have that figured out, but it's like I'm coming to you,
Right.
just like as you would come to me, and like we all have value, and I think if we can collaborate, it creates a much more meaningful impact.
Absolutely. Well, I think we'll end it there, man.
Yeah.
Communication, collaboration. We got to get people to the table, figure out how we can move forward, and
just do it
go
the right
from
way.
there.
Do it the right way.
So thanks again. Really appreciate it. Always love the conversation.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the next one.
Of course.
And let's go out there and enjoy this beautiful day.
Of course. That's the goal now.
Thanks again, bro.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.